A bedroom door pushed open for the third time that night. A bed that should hold a sleeping 4-year-old, empty. A window forced wide. A shutter raised from the outside. 19 years later, that 15-second moment is still the most examined window frame in modern criminal history, and the man investigators now call their prime suspect has never stood trial for it. This is Ola Detective Files. Tonight, we're not chasing tabloid theories. We're walking through the clips, the interviews, and the evidence file itself. The parts most coverage skips past. A named suspect, 2 police forces, 19 years, 0 charges. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why. Ask yourself now, before we go any further, if you were the detective walking into that apartment, what's the first thing you'd look for? Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let's begin. It's a warm night in late April, at a resort on Portugal's southern coast. Praia da Luz, quiet, familiar, full of families. Dinner at the tapas restaurant sits 55 meters from the apartment door. Close enough to see the building. Close enough to feel safe walking back every 30 minutes to check. That's the arrangement 7 families settled on that week. Not improvised, not careless. A note was even left with staff requesting the same table by the pool every night because it faced the apartments directly. The first check that evening, 9:05 p.m. The bedroom door, left slightly ajar, is now open wider. Nothing alarming, just noted, and pulled closed again. 40 minutes pass. A second check, no issue. Then, at 10 p.m., the third check begins. The door opens. The room is dark. A parent's eyes adjust, scanning for a shape that should be there. In a bed, breathing steady. It isn't. A quick assumption follows. She must have wandered to another room. She hasn't. Then a gust of wind pulls the curtains open, and the room reveals what the dark was hiding. A window pushed wide. A shutter raised from the outside. This isn't a story about a parent's mistake. Every family on that trip used a version of the same system that week. What happened in apartment 5A happened to no one else. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of case file detail work we do. The parts headlines skip. Subscribe now, because what comes next is the sequence Portuguese police built their entire early investigation around, and it starts with a man carrying a child through the dark, 35 minutes before anyone knew a child was missing. Before we go further into that sighting, you need to know who was missing. Madeleine Beth McCann, born May 2003, in Leicester, England. The eldest of 3, twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, born 2 years later. Her parents, Kate and Jerry, met as medical students in Glasgow in 1993, married in 1998. Years of trying, then IVF, then Madeleine. Jerry worked as a cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital. Kate trained as a gynecologist before stepping back into general practice. More time for the children, less time in surgery. They settled in Rothley, a quiet village. Ordinary, by every measure that matters. 2 working professionals, 3 young kids. A family holiday finally within reach, after years of hospital shifts and sleepless nights that had nothing to do with crime. That's the part almost no one puts on screen. Before Praia da Luz became a crime scene, it was just a holiday. A week of sun, dinners with friends, and a 4-year-old girl who liked to play by the pool. Hold on to that image, because everything that follows, the investigation, the suspects, the headlines, happens to that same ordinary family, and it never lets them go. Picture the scene now, in sequence, because the minutes matter more than anything else in this case. 9:05 p.m. Jerry walks back for his check. The door isn't wide open, just wider than he left it. He doesn't think much of it. He closes it most of the way and returns to the table. A small detail. It will matter later, but not yet. 9:15 p.m. 10 minutes after Jerry's check, a member of the group, Jane Tanner, steps outside, and sees something that will dominate headlines for years. A man, walking briskly, carrying a child in his arms, moving away from the apartment block. No alarm has been raised yet. No one knows anything is wrong. She simply notices him and keeps walking. 9:45 p.m. A second friend checks the apartment. Nothing unusual. 10 p.m. Kate opens the door for the third time, and the room tells a different story than it did an hour earlier. Now here's what you need to sit with. For years, that man Jane Tanner saw became the center of an international manhunt. Sketches, appeals, a face investigators were certain belonged to an abductor. He wasn't one. He was eventually identified, a British tourist, carrying his own sleeping child back from a nearby creche. A coincidence, a closed lead. But there was a second sighting that night. A separate family, the Smiths, reported seeing a man carrying a child elsewhere in the resort, around the same window of time. Police built a photo fit from their description. That photo fit was never fully released to the public. Ask yourself why an investigation under this much global pressure would sit on a lead like that. We don't have the answer yet, but it's still open, unresolved, nearly 2 decades later. And it's about to collide with something far stranger. The first person Portuguese police would ever formally name as a suspect, living just 150 yards from that window. Within hours, this stops being a family's private nightmare and becomes something else entirely, a global operation. Local police are notified within minutes. By morning, Portuguese and soon British officers are involved. A search area expands outward from the resort. Dogs, volunteers, officers on foot combing scrubland in the dark. Within days, press conferences are being filmed and broadcast internationally. A reward fund launches and grows fast. Contributions from J.K. Rowling, Richard Branson, Simon Cowell. It eventually reaches £2.5 million. Madeleine's face appears on the cover of People magazine within weeks. British tabloids run her photo on the front page almost daily for 6 months straight. Sky News creates a permanent menu tab just for this case, sitting alongside UK News and World News. £13 million, 3 countries, hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation. This becomes, by any measure, the largest missing child investigation in modern history. And somewhere inside all of that noise, the reward money, the headlines, the international coverage, a photo fit built from a second, separate witness sighting sits quietly in a drawer, unreleased, unresolved. Because while the world was chasing one man seen carrying a child that night, Portuguese police were about to name someone else entirely. Not based on that sighting, based on where he lived, 150 yards from that window, in the exact direction the search had already been pointing. 12 days after Madeleine disappeared, Portuguese police named their first formal suspect, Robert Murat, 34 years old, British Portuguese, a property consultant living with his mother, 150 yards from apartment 5A, in the exact direction that early witness sighting had described. Here's the detail that matters. Murat wasn't hiding. He'd volunteered as a translator in the first chaotic days of the search, helping police communicate with English-speaking tourists. That's how he ended up on their radar at all. No criminal record, nothing in his history that pointed to this. Portuguese law gave him arguido status, a formal suspect designation. It comes with the right to silence, the right to a lawyer. It does not come with a charge. Forensic teams searched his home. Sniffer dogs went through his garden. They found nothing. The press didn't wait for that outcome. Over the following months, more than 100 newspaper articles named Murat, attaching accusations to him that had no basis in any official investigation document. Allegations of criminal involvement, entirely unsupported, entirely false. His partner and a business associate were pulled into the coverage too. All 3 were cleared, without charge, in July 2008. Murat didn't stay quiet about what had been done to him. He brought the largest number of simultaneous libel actions in British legal history and won £600,000 in damages from 11 UK newspapers in a hearing that lasted under 7 minutes. Sit with that for a second. An innocent man, publicly destroyed, before a single piece of evidence existed against him. Now ask yourself, if the press machine got this wrong, this loudly, this fast, what else did it get wrong on the way to the real investigation? Because that investigation was about to produce a piece of forensic evidence so contested, the scientist who ran the test would later say, police told the family something that wasn't true. In July 2007, 2 specialist dogs arrived from the UK. Eddie, trained to detect the scent of human remains. Keela, trained to detect blood traces. Both are brought into apartment 5A. Both give an alert. Weeks later, the same 2 dogs are brought to a rental car, one the McCanns had used weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Both alert again. Here's what you need to understand about what that actually means, forensically and legally. A dog alert is not evidence. It's a lead. It tells investigators where to direct further testing. Nothing more. A trained dog's nose points towards something. It doesn't prove what that something is. So testing follows. Samples are sent for DNA analysis, using a method called low copy number DNA profiling, a technique built to detect trace biological material, but one still contested in courtrooms today because of how easily it can be affected by contamination. Before either parent is formally questioned, the forensic scientist who ran that test, John Lowe, of the UK's Forensic Science Service, sends Portuguese investigators a warning by email. The results, he says clearly, are scientifically inconclusive. That warning never reaches the McCanns. Instead, in September 2007, when Jerry is brought in for questioning, Portuguese police tell him directly that Madeleine's DNA has been found in the car. 100% match. Journalists are briefed the same day. The claim spreads across international press within hours, stated as settled fact by the very people whose job was to confirm it wasn't. It was never 100% match. The scientist who ran the test said so, on the record. Both parents are declared arguidos that same month. Kate is questioned for 11 hours, 48 questions. On legal advice, aware by now of how selectively the investigation had already spoken to the press, she declines to answer. According to Kate's own account, the following day, a detective suggests privately that if she simply says Madeleine died accidentally in the apartment and that she hid it, she could receive a 2-year sentence. Jerry, he tells her, would face nothing. She refuses. That single reported conversation, an account Kate has stood by publicly for nearly 2 decades, becomes the seed of a theory that will end up in a best-selling book, a courtroom, and eventually, the European Court of Human Rights. In July 2008, Portugal's Attorney General formally archives the case. No element of proof whatsoever, he states, that would allow any lucid, honest conclusion. Arguido status is lifted from Kate, Jerry, and Robert Murat. The full file, over 11,000 pages, is released to the public on CD-ROM. 3 days later, the man who used to lead this investigation publishes a book. Gonçalo Amaral had been removed from the case in October 2007, after controversial public remarks. His book, The Truth of the Lie, makes a specific claim, that Madeleine died accidentally inside the apartment, and that her parents staged an abduction to conceal it. It becomes a bestseller in Portugal. The McCanns sue for libel. In 2015, a Lisbon court rules in their favor, €500,000 in damages. Amaral appeals. In 2016, a Portuguese appeals court overturns that ruling, citing freedom of expression. Portugal's Supreme Court sides with the appeal. The McCanns take the case to their final possible venue, the European Court of Human Rights. In September 2022, the ECHR rules against them. Now, listen carefully to what that ruling actually says, because it's misquoted constantly. The court did not find Amaral's theory to be true. It found that Portugal had given the family a fair hearing, and that the damage to their reputation came from the period they themselves were declared official suspects, not from the book itself. A legal door closing is not the same as a theory being proven. Those are two different sentences, and true crime coverage collapses them into one, constantly. The book remains in print, the theory remains unproven, and the case remains open, because 6,000 kilometers away, in Germany, a very different name was about to surface. One with an actual criminal record, and phone data that would place him near that apartment on the exact night Madeleine disappeared. Christian Bruckner, born December 1976, in Würzburg, Germany. By 17, he already has a conviction: sexual abuse of a child, in Bavaria. A 2-year sentence follows. In 1995, he relocates to Portugal, settling along the Algarve coast, the same stretch of coastline where the McCanns would holiday 12 years later. He lives out of a camper van, then a cottage, just outside Praia da Luz. Odd jobs, drug dealing. Repeated convictions follow him across 2 decades. Trafficking in 2011, child sexual abuse offenses in 2013, again in 2016. A pattern, escalating, largely invisible to the public, until his name surfaces in connection to Madeleine. That happens in 2017. A former associate tells German police that during a bar conversation prompted by a news segment marking the 10-year anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, Bruckner made comments suggesting he knew what happened to her. Investigators start building a file. What they find? His phone data places him near Praia da Luz within 5 minutes of Madeleine's disappearance. Records show he transferred ownership of a vehicle to someone else's name the day after she vanished. He has a documented history of breaking into holiday apartments in that exact area. And in the 17 days before Madeleine disappeared, 2 break-ins had already occurred at the McCann's own apartment block. In June 2020, German prosecutors hold a press conference. Lead prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters states, publicly, that investigators have concrete evidence Bruckner killed Madeleine. He calls it a murder investigation. But listen to the second half of that same statement, the part that gets cut from most coverage. He also admits the evidence is largely circumstantial, and that under German law, circumstantial evidence alone rarely clears the bar required to file formal charges. A murder investigation with a named suspect and a legal system that says, not enough, not yet. Bruckner has denied any involvement, consistently, for 6 years. In 2022, Portugal names him an arguido II, making extradition for questioning legally possible. That same year, Germany charges him separately: 3 counts of aggravated rape, 2 of child sexual abuse, unconnected to Madeleine, but painting the same pattern investigators had already built their file around. In October 2024, a German court acquits him on all 5 counts. Insufficient evidence, the judge rules. Prosecutors appeal immediately. And in September 2025, Bruckner walks out of prison, not for Madeleine's case, but for a different sentence entirely. What happens to him next is something almost no other documentary on this case has covered yet. September 2025. Bruckner completes a 7.5-year sentence for the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American woman in the same coastal town, 2 years before Madeleine disappeared. He's released under an electronic tag, ordered to remain in Germany, passport surrendered. The Met requests an interview ahead of his release. He declines. By November, a camera crew tracks him down. He lashes out. By February 2026, he's living in a tent, in woodland, in northern Germany, relocated repeatedly as local residents protest his presence. citing safety concerns for children. Authorities move him again, this time to housing over 3 hours away. 8 undercover officers, working in 6-hour shifts, follow him around the clock. 2 phones, one his, one issued by police, so contact is never lost. In May 2026, he evades that surveillance. He's arrested shortly after, following a reported altercation. Then, just weeks ago, June 2026, reports emerge that British investigators have received a new dossier. Fresh material, linked directly to Bruckner, handed to the Met's Operation Grange team. Extradition, sources say, is still a long way off. But something has shifted. One source close to the investigation calls it a gear change in how seriously the Met is now pursuing him. Here's what nobody's covered yet, and what almost no other channel is telling you. This dossier arrived within the same month researchers were preparing this very episode. Whatever it contains, it hasn't been made public. But it's the clearest sign in years that Operation Grange isn't a cold case anymore. It's active, and it's moving towards something. The only question left is whether the law will let it finish. Here's the obstacle no headline fully explains. Germany's constitution makes it extremely difficult to extradite its own citizens outside the EU, unless the charge is specifically murder. Right now, officially, this remains a missing persons case, not a murder case, not because investigators lack belief, because of a single line in a legal code, sitting between 6 years of circumstantial evidence and a courtroom. Operation Grange has spent over £13 million since 2011. A further £18,000 was approved just for this financial year. A small, deliberate sign this file is still being worked, not shelved. The stated goal, according to people close to the investigation, is to bring charges before May 2027, Madeleine's 20th anniversary. Think about what that timeline actually means. 2 decades of searches, forensic reversals, false confessions to the press, and one wrongly accused man who had to sue 11 newspapers just to clear his name. And the case still isn't closed. It isn't closed because the standard for a courtroom isn't the same as the standard for a headline. Belief isn't proof. And right now, that gap is the entire story. If this kind of fact-first investigation is what you came here for, no filler, no unverified theory dressed up as fact, subscribe. We'll be here the moment this case moves again.